Greetings and welcome to your dream narrative, pal. Dark Whisper Stories is my name. I am an Irish storyteller, and I consider it a tremendous honor to be the voice you hear before you go to sleep tonight. I have created a simple narrative for you about a boy, a dog, and a volcano. Not much occurs in this story. Give yourself permission to relax more and 10 more sense the bed support underneath you, the ground, or whatever you're lying on. Tonight, and below it all, sense the assistance for the earth, our home. Sense the consistency of. You feel as though you can relax a bit more. Now that you're growing increasingly conscious of that profound back up, that continuous. You are supporting 9. Permit my voice to serve as a safety anchor. This evening will be a. My voice will only ever lead you to safety, friend. Locations, then use that information to see if you can immerse yourself in this a little longer. I am now letting go a bit more. 8. Check your body to see where you are at this moment. Holding, perhaps you sense. Perhaps you are in pain. Maybe in your feet, tension. In your lower legs, perhaps in your stomach, or in your arms, hands, or chest. Alternatively, perhaps like me, you keep the strain in your. Face it wherever it is and let it go. The day is now 7. Whatever has existed has. Whatever will be will be. Just acknowledge whatever thoughts you may be having. Them as a component of the human condition. They will constantly arrive and depart, and as they are not to be fought when they arrive. With or music, rejected thank you. They perceive them as they are, and watch them float after releasing them, fading away in the moonlight like leaves, clouds, or a river moving through a starry sky. This is your sky 6. Now this is your. You have nowhere to go at this time. Nowhere to go now. So let that knowledge lead you to this moment. Even more to allow presently. Proceed even further. Maybe 5 is starting to seem a little. Now express your thankfulness for this moment of appreciation for the small items, the air you breathe, and the shelter you have. The people that are important to you tonight. You, the little things. Because you always have serenity inside of you. Waiting to be. Your steady companion is waiting to be felt. Check to see if you can sense that calm. Tonight, try to locate. If 3 starts interacting with your. Now, the imagination starts to picture a little white puppy and a boy in a lovely scenery, and in the distant, a stunning. The dog and boy are safe and investigating this volcano. Lovely location that you can explore with them. Today, far from everything that you. Remember to check in with your body again. Your body has now put forth a lot of effort for you. It's time to give it today. Now take a nap and let go of everything. As I describe my slumber for tonight. A tale of sleep. There once was a boy and a. The youngster was now neither extremely fond of dogs nor volcanoes. Neither too young nor too old, which is the age range where the world feels both familiar and brimming with mystery. He exuded steadiness. Quiet, introspective youngster who enjoyed watching and pay attention before he music talked, wearing his hair long. His hands, however, and the ends were slightly curved. Little displayed the traces of a life spent examining tree scrapes and climbing bramble scratches. Traces of the earth and leaves from the past that were never completely removed. The little white dog had fur as silky as clouds and clear, perceptive eyes that appeared to comprehend. The boy remarked that she was clever about everything. She was intelligent enough without having to brag. She moved lightly on her paw, feeling as though intent, as if she were always aware of the path, even when the lad. Didn't her tail wag and his ears twitch at every sound? Softer, more subdued assurance than a demonstration of thrill. She was his friend. The boy and confidant adored her in the same manner that you love something that has always been dependable and compassionate. The youngster and the dog had not run or been lost at this point. They were out here. Since they had decided to be out in the open, they were exploring. Realm where the ground stretched out and the air smelt of wide expanses. They had discussed the vacation incessantly before they went, for several days or even weeks, but only in the discreet manner that dogs and boys do, with sharing appearances and unsaid, realizing that they had only traveled far enough to feel free to discover what was beyond the known, the sides of their. When they started their journey, the sun was high in the sky. They had brought a modest bag with enough supplies for the adventure. A water flask, a crust of bread, and a little bag of goodies for the music dog, which she excitedly sniffed before. There was no hurry when they left. Steps without an urgent objective. Simply the silent delight of wondering about being together under the open sky as they strolled through the boys' minds. Music floated through his head, feeling free as the landscape, and he pondered without desperation. They might see the dog curled up next to. Occasionally, her nose touches the. She turned her ears toward the distance sounds, and she appeared happy to let the day go as it did. Step by carefully and without hurry. Step, the route they took was a silent one that wound through a scenery that seemed unspoiled, and the boy and the dog strolled through without hurry. Lazy fields with wild flowers growing. Clusters, their hues subdued by the dim illumination of the air here smelled warm from the sun. Grass and a hint of sweetness, as if the earth. It had made the decision to music. Bloom the boy felt that he didn't need a map and didn't have one. He walked with the same level of confidence that kids do. Have faith that the world will provide you with the information you require. The dog trotted behind you when you were ready to see it. Her tiny white music paws barely made a sound. Noise as they traversed the gentle irregular. Occasionally, she would ground. Halt the sinking of her nose into anything. A patch of grass or the slight trace of another. The guy waited calmly, observing her with a tiny grin. That morning, they didn't go searching for anything in. Specifically, they hadn't intended to locate the volcano, although the youngster had once heard about it in a low-key tale from A. They claimed it was an old volcano that had been dormant for a long time. It now resembles a mountain because the neighbor erected a shrug, but they claim that it occasionally still shines like fire. Hasn't completely forgotten how to burn, as the boy had imagined it. Tall, silent, and enigmatic, but he never imagined he would see it. Presently, as they came around a tiny slope, the child paused, gasping for air. Instant, and he impulsively reached out, his hand stroking the dog's silky fur. It was slowly rising back there in the distance. The shape is so large and, even so, it hardly seemed genuine. The volcano didn't appear to. It actually appeared to be dangerous. Serene as though it had been there for centuries, unaffected by the outside world. Its slopes were verdant, with trees growing up half of it. Up before exposing bare rock close to the music, was rounded at the top, as if time itself had become softer. It as well as in the afternoon light. Sun, there was an oddity. There was something almost mystical about how it appeared to glow a little, like a hazy recollection of. She tilted her head and flicked her ears in the gloom. Ahead, while gazing at the volcano, the boy squatted next to her and put his hand on her. She wagged her tail and he muttered, "You see it too, don't you?" Once, as if to imply that she realized that although the sun was lower in the sky, it was now mid-afternoon. Then it ought to have been tempered by a thin layer of clouds that extended over the light was dim on the horizon, diffused, resulting in a golden and pastel environment. The air was warm, but not thick, and occasionally accompanied by a breeze. The aroma of faraway trees and the sun warmed. For a little moment, Earth the youngster remained still. The volcano seemed to be farther away. Farther than it had initially seemed, with its mild slopes fading into the horizon's cloud surrounding. The world seemed silent around him, as if it had stopped too. There was no haste. Take note of the music mountain. There is no rush here, only the gentle hum of life continuing on its own pace. The only noises were those of nature. The occasional crickets chirping in the grass, the little sound of an insect that flitted by its wings, briefly capturing the light. A second before vanishing. Once more, and somewhere in the distance that is so thin that it almost seems envisioned the call of some. The dog stood next to the boy, sniffing and twitching her nose. The wind, she appeared more vigilant now. The boy couldn't hear the catching sounds coming from her ears leaning this way. Her tail was waving, but she didn't seem tense. Gradually, as though to convince him that this location at this precise instant was as it ought to be, the child repositioned the tiny sack draped over his. He felt the familiar weight on his shoulder and glanced up at observing the slow, deliberate motion of the clouds in the sky. The light changed as they moved, like a painting coming to life. Went by, dappling the ground with shadow, and he could feel the sun's warmth on his face and the refreshing breeze as it blew across his. He spoke to himself more than to the others. "This is a good place, Skin." She looked at him, her bright eyes finding his, and she briefly gave off the impression that she was concurring with him, as though she could also sense the silence. The boy stayed for a long time, staring at the volcano. There was something about the distance that seemed more significant than just its size or the appearance of its dim glow, even in. It couldn't even be explained by daylight. Music, himself, but he sensed it in the depths of chest as if it were a question he hadn't yet mastered. He wasn't sure exactly what he was looking for, so he asked, because he was still unable to articulate it. Nevertheless, he had been carrying it around for days, if not longer. A sensation, Wait a little while, but tenacious before the dog brushed across his leg. Pulling him gently out of his reverie, she glanced up at. Her bright eyes were full of silence, and her head was slightly cocked. He responded, "I understand," while gently bending down to scratch behind. "I'm not sure what we're searching for in her ears. Either way, but I believe it's there." He gestured to the volcano, and the canine simply waggled her tail. Once, as though she realized that the boy had no idea why he felt the desire to leave. That he did, perhaps it was because of the manner the volcano seemed so confident in itself that stable, or perhaps it was something easier, the prospect of witnessing something greater, older than anything else and more certain than aware that he had repositioned the backpack on his shoulder once more and looked at Doug, who was now a few paces ahead. Her tiny white paw was gliding across the grass. "Come on," he whispered quietly, but the dog didn't wait a second for a strong let go. Invitation, she strode ahead, her nose breaking as she touched her ears pricked with silence as she ground. Unwavering resolve, the youngster moved slowly and maintained the volcano's steady growth, so a little bit with each one. For a moment, the youngster wandered in silence, his eyes darting between the volcano in the distance and the route ahead. He took slow, deliberate steps, but there was a weight to his. Something that seemed heavier was on my mind now. He grabbed into his suitcase as they approached the peak. Felt the familiar contour of the small bundle wrapped in cotton as they traveled. The dog stopped up in the middle of meal. Her petite figure is framed by a touch of. She turned to face the sunlight that had penetrated the clouds. Him as though to see whether they were coming to a halt. However, the child grinned a little when his fingers brushed the package once more before extracting it. "Okay," he replied quietly, "let's stop." Here, they discovered a peaceful area at the foot of a big tree, with roots that curl out of the ground like ancient worn. Although the darkness beneath it was cold, sunlight was still able to. The ground was covered with lovely golden leaves. Patterns. The youngster sat on the ground with his legs crossed and unwrapped the cloth to display the basic supper he had brought that morning, a little bread loaf, a piece of, a few snacks and cheese for the music. The dog took up residence next to him, observing as he sliced the bread and then removed her treats, and she sat calmly, softly wagging her tail. He placed her rewards in front of her, pressing them on the ground. He said, "You're spoiled, you know." Smelling, she smiled a little carefully before. While he was eating, his mind kept returning to the He felt burdened by the query, yet he was unable to locate the response to, and after that it came to. It concerned him and his granny. The way she always appeared to voice her stories. Understand what he should say when he required it. She had been absent for several months. Now, yet her absence was still felt. Odd, like a book that has missing pages. He had cherished her and was losing. She left him with unanswered questions about how to inquire, let alone explain why people left him. Wondered why it felt like she was there and where they had gone. Somehow still with him even after she. Did he not sigh quietly as he leaned back against the looking up at the changing leaves on the tree, music. Above, the dog completed her. Treats put her head on his knee and half closed her eyes. Music ended, and he petted her fur. He was absently thinking about the questions. Perhaps the volcano would have answers once more. Or perhaps it would simply make him feel more intimate, even though he was unaware of it, to her. Consequently, by the time they packed up the sun, it had begun to slowly descend. Leftovers from their lunch and resumed their journey. The sky softened, going from being pale to, from blue to pink and gold hues that painted the scene in soft, waning light. The volcano that had seemed so far away. Now, it loomed larger and was gentle. Slopes that are more pronounced in opposition to the youngster horizon moved more slowly now, not because fatigue, but from a more subdued, almost reverent source. As they approached, the air had altered, not cooler rather than heavier, although distinct, as if the area surrounding the volcano possessed its own unique. Even the dog appeared to sense the silence. Her ears perked up as she walked. Lighter and more purposeful the volcano's slopes rose softly coated with spots of grass and the ground was covered in tiny stones that glittered in the dim light. Smooth, rounded terrain that is dispersed like forgotten. The child stooped to pick up one of the treasures and turned it over in his hand, which felt warm as if it had been placed in. He put it in his pocket and left it in the sun all day. Without a. The dog stopped and sniffed the word as they climbed. Air, wagging her tail in the deliberate, methodical manner of. The boy paused next to her, placing his hands on his. As he gathered his breath, the volcano's summit remained motionless. Distant, but the illumination was different. It seems to glow here. The youngster rubbed his eyes dimly, wondering if it was simply the sunset. Tricks were played, but the light didn't. Fading before hearing what wasn't a voice. Precisely, but it arrived as a remembrance of one. Softly that he nearly missed it at first. Like a murmur that continued on the "You don't need to know every small detail" breeze. The boy's hand dropped to the dog's head and froze. She automatically glanced up at him, serene and steady as though she had heard it. Additionally, his grandmother's voice was distinct and, when she was speaking to him, it was as familiar as ever. Important, he shut his eyes and felt the warmth of the blanket of air enveloping him. Occasionally, the voice went on, so it's sufficient to only be able to feel the sun on your feet and the earth beneath them. Face and being aware that you are a part of something. Greater tears stung the boy's eyes. Gaze, even though the burden he had borne in his chest appeared to move in order to lift. It seemed as though the volcano's glow was penetrating inside. He relaxed the queries he was unable to pose. He was unaware of how the voice had arrived at this location, but it didn't. The first time in a long time that he. Feeling motionless, the youngster inhaled deeply. Breath as he opened his eyes to see the volcano glimmering. In the gentle twilight light, it was more than just a location. No longer, it was a secure presence and sturdy as if it had always been there for him. For a long time, the youngster stood there while the warm light from the volcano brushed over his skin. The air was so peaceful, and his skin was steady and velvety. Now that the world seemed to have stopped, holding this, he closed his eyes for a moment, just for himself. Felt his grandmother's presence once more, but not as he recalled. But in the manner that she, music, felt, it was like the familiar comfort of cover the sound of her laughter and the scent of her kitchen. The dog softly pushed on his leg, dragging him back to the present, her tail bouncing as she gazed up at him with those perceptive eyes. The boy whispered, "Okay," in a firm voice. "We'll continue the rest of the way now." He inhaled again, then resumed walking, keeping the dog near his. The grass gave place to polished surfaces as the walkway slowly curved upward. Stone that gave out a weak warmth as the boy touches the surface of the stone's sense of texture. Strong grounding. Old, it didn't feel weird or menacing, it seemed as though the music always belonged there. They are patient and stable. When they arrived at the summit, the view spread out in front of them like as if in a music dream. The crater of the volcano was shallow, and its center glows smoothly. Golden light that seemed to pulsate slightly like a heartbeat. The light wasn't harsh or brilliant. Instead, it as if the volcano were providing the warmth to the. At night, the boy felt secure and knew he was. The vistas stretched safely around them. Music, painted in deep oranges for eternity and purples as the sun sank, allowing for the. The boy took a seat at the edge of the stars. Crater, the dog cuddled up next to him, his legs tucked under him, her head lying on his. He felt no need to ask inquiries on his lap. No longer the burden he had carried, the sorrow, the pondering how light the pain of missing her felt. Quieter now, he didn't have the responses, but in some way, music was all right. The boy spent some time here admiring the beauty of the volcano. His body was still glowing as if it were gentle, as if it had diminished to reflect the serenity he experienced. He was unable to express it from within, but when he sat, it seemed like the volcano was keeping watch on him there. Not in a scary sense, but similarly to how his grandmother, accustomed to silence, endurance, and unwavering in love, he recalled the tales she told him and the way her voice would. She would always end her tales by wrapping herself about him like a warm blanket. With something easy and reassuring, like Yule. Realized that the boy had never precisely understood what she intended, but now sitting here in the quiet light of the volcanic. All around him, he believed he. The dog next to him woke up and gave a gentle. He gazed down at her as she shifted her head on his lap, letting out a sigh. Grinned as he ran his fingertips over her delicate white. He responded, "Fur, we should go," but his tone was. He stood low, almost hesitantly. He stretched his legs carefully, and rose the dog, too, trembling slightly as if she were waking up from a. He saw the volcano in his dream. "Thank you," though he wasn't certain of who or what he was talking about, he whispered. Then, with the canine at his side, he started the journey down the path slope. The gentle brightness of twilight shines ahead. With the volcano behind him, the walk home felt different. The child no longer felt the burden in his chest, not like prior to the stars starting to disperse by the time they got home. Throughout the heavens, their soft, dim light. The house was familiar and tiny, with softly lighting windows. The youngster pushed open the dark. He placed his back to the door and filled a bowl with water for the dog, who graciously lead it up before snuggling up in her typical. The boy's parents were already in the area close to the hearth. He fell asleep and made his way into bed, the cover feeling nice and cozy on his skin. He briefly rested on his back and gazed at the ceiling, his thoughts returning to the. He recalled the warmth and light of the volcano and how it had felt so, living as though it comprehended him, and in that silent moment prior to. He discovered while sleeping that his grandmother wasn't gone, but in reality, she was in the tales she shared, in the recollections he held, and perhaps at locations such as the. The boy's eyes were heavy as he drifted, volcano. He sensed the same unwavering presence off as he had on the. He was held by the peaceful, warm mountain as he slipped into. When the dog shifted in her sleep, her little dreams, body rising and lowering in tandem with each. The stars' steady breathing continued outside. Dance far away and across the sky. The volcano continued to glow, dimly beneath the vigilant